Right now, it feels like, oh shit, this guy pickled his brain.
Right. Yeah. It
Because you know,
gets
there's that language where like you almost go, that guy's manic.
right.
And I don't need to spend time with that. Like I've had enough of that in real life. I've heard enough of it on podcasts. Hey man, Ted Arcidi, here's another one. I've
We
read,
are streaming, just so you know.
oh, okay. Well, that's all right. People can hear
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I've read, I don't know, 60 wrestling biographies and stuff, listened to thousands of hours of wrestler podcasting.
Right.
Ted Arcidi's name, I'm not sure it's ever come up.
Right.
Like I don't know anything about that guy. I don't hear him mentioned. Nothing.
Right. Yeah. You know what? It's exactly as I described. Where it's just like the imagination of like a creative mind. Like you
Yeah.
have this new piece.
It
Because
is
honestly,
fascinating to think of like there's a character dropped into this world.
right.
And it's like you put whatever you want on him. It's
Right.
pretty cool.
And the truth
Super
is,
strange. It'd be hard to sell it in a boardroom.
with that guy is that he was a super big, muscular, brawny dude, and that was
Yeah, it
fucking
probably couldn't work.
Vince's jerk off, you know.
I listen to just all kinds of wrestling shit. So I listen to the Jeff Jarrett show, and it should be the worst, you know, that should be the worst thing there is. And I love it.
Right.
He has such a fascinating perspective from like just being, you know, multi-generational and then also running behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But he was talking this week about he's never had an operation for a wrestling injury.
Right.
That's amazing. And I realize you can go, he works a safe rate, and lots of dudes do. But I mean, like twisting a knee, you could do that going down the steps.
Absolutely.
It's just shocking. And by the way, it doesn't matter how safe you are. If you're in there with somebody who punches half an inch off, now your nose is broke.
Right.
You know, like it's
He
not
might have got a
like
broken nose.
however he may have, but didn't have to have it surgically repaired.
Right.
That's shocking. He was saying that he never got into the drugs, like the pain pill stuff.
Right.
But he hooked up with this doctor early on that he still works with, and the guy basically said, if you're not doing any pharmaceuticals, then you need to do all this other stuff for health.
Right.
And it's pretty interesting. It feels like a conversation wouldn't be bad for everybody on earth to have, or everybody that has access to, you know, resources and things. Like, I don't know, it surprises me. Like I said, if you listed a bunch of guys who I could listen to their podcasts, he's the last one I think would be interesting. But
He showed some stuff on that. It was like behind. No, it was that like. It wasn't the finger poke of doom episode of Dark Side of the Ring, but it was like the one where Jeff Jarrett lays down and Hulk is all pissed off and everything, and
yeah,
like keeps his belt. He was pretty good on there, but also like, I mean, when you talk nepo babies, like he's about as big a nepo baby as you could possibly get.
he's a nepo grandbaby.
Is that? Oh yeah, I guess so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's deep in the family. What is this thing called?
It's the Tales of Terror, Tales of something. Tales of Terror, EC Companion.
Ah, there it is.
Page 20.
So we're streaming. The Kings are showing up, so we could tell them about what we're.
Good morning, King Kayfabers. Welcome.
So what we're getting into, guys, is the Senate subcommittee testimony. We have all of Bill Gaines's testimony with Senator Kayfabe lobbing the questions his way. We have the monologues and stuff that Gaines reads out, and this is going to be our big Sunday video. Or not, man. Maybe it doesn't go that long, and maybe comic scene will be our big one, because we're going to go through comic scene 1, because this doesn't look that big. Yeah, this is probably a quick video. I thought it was way longer, but I guess there's a conversation to have before and after.
Definitely.
We'll see. I'll let you make the call on what should go up Sunday. So the cool thing is that we're going to do the Gaines testimony this round, but there is a Wortham set of testimony that if this video does well.
Do we say all this on the actual video?
Yeah, I guess so. If you're good, I'm good, man.
Yes.
Jim, you want to start recording? Are you happy with that composition? I feel like the camera should be more on you, like more.
I'm all right with that. I can move it a little if you want, but I'm fine with that.
It just feels heavy. Maybe like an inch or two. Like, no, don't move it that way. Like move it this, like, completely, because what'll happen is there will be one of us who's a giant. That feels more balanced. No?
Got it.
Can you guys hear us well? I'm nervous about this green light that I'm seeing. And like, look at the computational power that, like, it's totally eating up our computer. So when we were streaming, there was something. What did we shoot? Oh yeah, the gaming video. When we streamed and recorded, there was a couple stutter steps.
Okay.
So we'll just be mindful of that. Like when I deliver these vids to you and stuff, if you notice some of that, then maybe we can't stream these parts, because it's like we got a good camera now and it's bringing in lots of information. So okay, yeah, that's the page where everything starts. All right, Jimmy, I'm going to start recording.
Yes.
I'm good if you are.
Yes.
Welcome to your favorite YouTube channel, Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Jim, we have a big conversation to have on this episode. This is an instrumental moment in comics, the Senate subcommittee hearings, very famous William Gaines' testimony to Senator Kayfabe and others in the early to mid 40s, April 21st, 1954, to be exact. In retrospect, what everybody remembers from the day is that Bill Gaines was on amphetamines for just like all the housewives of the 50s who were on speed to keep their weight down. So was he, and describes himself as being a little manic on the microphone and things. We'll see what that's about in this conversation.
Should say too, this testimony was done in the afternoon of April 21st. The morning's testimony was Dr. Frederick Wortham. So that's what he's following, like a rebuttal of the guy who is saying comics are contributing to juvenile delinquency.
We have lived through several versions of this when it comes to mass media in our lifetimes. When we were kids in like 89, 90, you had the PMRC, Tipper Gore and those who were like in charge of censoring music, and they were calling musicians to the carpet to try to censor lyrics and things. This is where you have Two Live Crew, NWA, Dead Kennedys. Like these groups are, they had to come up with some sort of regulating body, some sort of censorship. And then a couple of years later, Mortal Kombat comes out on Sega CD. There's that game Night Trap with Dana Plato, where that talks about like rape overtones and things in these child video games. Same deal. They had some kind of hearings where the feds were basically like, if you guys do not police yourselves, we're going to police you. And when that stuff was happening in our lifetimes, I was thinking about this comic book stuff, because that directly, I always wanted to be a cartoonist. And those 50s hearings directly had an impact on, my chosen medium.
Yeah, we were talking off air, and I said this is third biggest American comic book moment, behind, of course, the invention of the comic book format and the publication of Superman.
Right.
In terms of shaping what this is, like, you can't really have comics without those first two incidents. But this one really changes the direction. And like, it was still the shadow whenever I start reading, like it was still the shadow cast on comics.
Right.
Because that's when comics started, the Biff Bam Pow comics aren't just for kids anymore in the late 80s.
Right.
You start to see those headlines. I mean, that is in response to this. Because at this point it was comics are just for kids. That's what this established, and for decades that was it.
Yeah, created that chilling effect. I guess when we get done with the testimony, we're going to do this like we did our court depositions and things. That was a very popular playlist. And when we were at Baltimore Comic Con, I got dozens of people coming up to me who were like, when are you going to do more court stuff? And I was just like, there's a finite number of court stuff. We'll do anything that we can get our hands on in terms of depositions and testimony. But this seems very. I was going through. I'm loading up my iPad with stuff to take on a big plane trip, and I was just scrolling through this book. I came across the full Gaines testimony. I was like, oh, that would be perfect for this. But we'll go through the testimony. Jimmy will play Bill Gaines, and I'll play everybody else. Man, I'll play the old powdered wig dudes who are up on the dais looking down upon Bill Gaines with his little foam core boards with crime suspense story covers behind his head and stuff. And we'll go through it. Then we'll have a little conversation at the end and talk about the ramifications and things that happened directly after and affected the industry for probably 25, 30 years.
Yeah, and the last note I have on this testimony is it was televised, which makes me think of like Nixon JFK debate, where like one dude was not ready to be on TV. Bill Gaines was not ready to be on TV.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that let me see it all. I want to see all the testimony, and they only show the same clips.
Yeah.
It's like that's the only part that's still available. I guess videotape didn't exist. Who knows how they...
It's true. It's hard to tell what state the video record of this is. Maybe it doesn't exist in its entirety anymore.
Right. So Jimmy, if you're good, I'm good. Once again, I'm playing all of the bureaucrats, which are innumerable. Probably the most famous one will be Senator Kayfabe of Tennessee, I believe, and Jimmy will be Gaines.
Ready when you are.
Mr. Beezer, William Gaines, the chairman. Will you come forward, Mr. Gaines? Will you be sworn? Do you solemnly swear to the testimony you will give to this subcommittee of the Committee on the Judiciary of the United States Senate will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, this is the testimony of William M. Gaines, publisher, Entertaining Comics Group, New York, New York, the chairman. You may proceed in your own manner.
Gentlemen, I would like to make a short statement. I am here as an individual publisher.
Will you give your name and address for the record?
My name is William Gaines. My business address is 225 Lafayette Street, New York City. I am publisher of the Entertaining Comics Group. I am a graduate of the School of Education of New York University. I have the qualifications to teach in secondary schools and high schools. What then am I doing before this committee? I'm a comic book publisher. My group is known as EC, Entertaining Comics. I am here as a voluntary witness. I asked for and was given this chance to be heard. 2 decades ago, my late father was instrumental in starting the comic magazine industry. He edited the first few issues of the first modern comic magazine, Famous Funnies. My father was proud of the industry he helped found. He was bringing enjoyment to millions of people. The heritage he left is the vast comic book industry, which employs thousands of writers, artists, engravers, and printers. It has weaned hundreds of thousands of children from pictures to the printed word. It has stirred their imaginations, given them an outlet for their problems and frustrations, but most important, given them millions of hours of entertainment. My father before me was proud of the comics he published. My father saw in the comic book a vast field of visual education. He was a pioneer. Sometimes he was ahead of his time. He published picture stories from science, picture stories from world history, and picture stories from American history. He published picture stories from the Bible. I would like to offer these in evidence.
They will be received for the subcommittee's permanent files. Let that be exhibit number 11. And then they show the document.
Since 1942, we have sold more than 5 million copies of picture stories from the Bible in the United States. It is widely used by churches and schools to make religion more real and vivid. Picture stories from the Bible is published throughout the world in dozens of translations, but it is nothing more nor nothing less than a comic magazine. I publish comic magazines in addition to picture stories from the Bible. For example, I publish horror comics. I was the first publisher in these United States to publish horror comics. I am responsible. I started them. Some may not like them. This is a matter of personal taste. It would be just as difficult to explain the harmless thrill of a horror story to a Dr. Wortham as it would be to explain the sublimity of love to a frigid old maid. My father was proud of the comics he published, and I am proud of the comics I publish. We use the best writers, the finest artists. We spare nothing to We spare nothing to make each magazine, each story, each page, each work of art. As evidence of this, I might point out that we have the highest sales in individual distribution. I don't mean highest sales in comparison to comics of another type. I mean highest sales in comparison to other horror comics. The comic magazine is one of the few remaining pleasures that a person may buy for a dime today. Pleasure is what we sell: entertainment, reading, enjoyment. Entertaining reading has never harmed anyone. Men of goodwill, free men, should be grateful for one sentence in the statement made by federal Judge John M. Woolsey when he lifted the ban on Ulysses. Judge Woolsey said, "It is only with the normal person that the law is concerned." May I repeat, he said, "It is only with the normal person that the law is concerned." Our American children are for the most part normal children. They are bright children. But those who want to prohibit comic magazines seem to see dirty, sneaky, perverted monsters who use the comics as a blueprint for action. Perverted little monsters are few and far between. They don't read comics. The chances are most of them are in schools for retarded children. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of our own children? Do we forget that they are citizens too and entitled to select what to read or do? We think our children are so evil, simple-minded that it takes a story of murder to set them to murder, a story of robbery to set them to robbery. Jimmy Walker once remarked that he never knew a girl to be ruined by a book. Nobody has ever been ruined by a comic. As has already been pointed out by previous testimony, a little healthy, normal child has never been made worse for reading comic magazines. The basic personality of a child is established before he reaches the age of comic book reading. I don't believe anything that has ever been written can make a child over-aggressive or delinquent. The roots of such characteristics are much deeper. The truth is that delinquency is the product of real environment in which the child lives and not the fiction he reads. There are many problems that reach our children today. They are tied up with insecurity. No pills can cure them. No law will legislate them out of being. The problems are economic and social, and they are complex. Our people need understanding. They need to have affection, decent homes, decent food. Do the comics encourage delinquency? Dr. David Abrahamson has written, "Comic books do not lead into crime, although they have been widely blamed for it. I find comic books many times helpful for children, in that through them they can get rid of many of their aggressions and harmful fantasies. I can never remember having seen one boy or girl who has committed a crime or who became neurotic or psychotic because he or she read comic books."
The chairman, Senator Kefauver. Senator Kefauver. Is that Dr. David Abrahamson?
That is right, sir. I can give you the source on that if you like. I will give it to you later. I would like to discuss, if you bear with me a moment more, something which Dr. Wortham provoked me into. Dr. Wortham, I am happy to say, I've just caught in a half-truth, and I'm very indignant about it. He said there is a magazine now on the stands preaching racial intolerance. The magazine he is referring to is my magazine. What he said, as much as he said, was true. There do appear in this magazine such materials as Spick, Dirty Mexican, but Dr. Wortham did not tell you what the plot of the story was. This is one of a series of stories designed to show the evils of race, prejudice, and mob violence, in this case against Mexican Catholics. Previous stories in this same magazine have dealt with anti-Semitism and anti-Negro feelings, evils of dope addiction, and development of juvenile delinquents. This is one of the most brilliantly written stories that I have ever had the pleasure to publish. I was very proud of it, and to find it being used in such a nefarious way made me quite angry. I am sure Dr. Wortham can read, and he must have read the story to have counted what he said he counted. I would like to read one more thing to you. Senator Hennings asked Dr. Peck a question. I will be perfectly frank with you. I have forgotten what he asked him, but this is the answer because I made a notation as he went along. No one has to read a comic book to read horror stories. Anyone, any child, any adult can find much more extreme descriptions of violence in the daily newspaper. You can find plenty of examples in today's newspaper. In today's edition of the Daily News, which more people will have access to than they will to any comic magazine, there are headline stories like this. Quote, "Finds he has killed wife with gun. Man in Texas woke up to find he had killed his wife with gun. She had bullet in head and he had a revolver in his hand." End quote. The next one. Cop pleads in cocktail poisoning. 20-year-old youth helps poison the mother and father of a friend. Court orders young hanging. Man who killed his wife will be hung in June for his almost perfect murder. Let us look at today's edition of the Herald Tribune. On the front page, a criminal describes how another criminal told him about a murder he had done. In the same paper, the story of a man whose ex-wife beat him on the head with a claw hammer and slashed him with a butcher knife. In the same paper, story of a lawyer who killed himself. In another, A story of that man who shot his wife while having a nightmare. Another, a story of a gang who collected an arsenal of guns and knives. These are very many stories of violence and crime in the Herald Tribune today. I am not saying it is wrong, but when you attack comics, when you talk about banning them as they do in some cities, you are only a step away from banning crimes in the newspapers. Here is something interesting which I think most of us don't know. Crime news is being made in some places. The United Nations UNESCO report, which I believe is the only place it is printed, shows that crime news is not permitted to appear in newspapers in Russia or communist China or other communist-held territories. We print our crime news. We don't think that the crime news or any news should be banned because it is bad for children. Once you start to censor, you must censor everything. You must censor comic books, radio, television, and newspapers. Then you must censor what people may say. Then you will have turned this country into Spain or Russia.
Mr. Gaines, let me ask you one thing with reference to Dr. Wortham's testimony. You used the pages of your comic book to send across a message. In this case, it was against racial prejudice. Is that it?
That is right.
You think, therefore, you can get across a message to the kids through the medium of your magazine that would lessen racial prejudice. Is that it?
By specific effort and spelling it out very carefully so that the point won't be missed by any of the readers, and I regret to admit that it still is missed by some readers as well as Dr. Wortham, we have, I think, achieved some degree of success in combating anti-Semitism, anti-Negro feeling, and so forth.
Why do you say you cannot at the same time and in the same manner use the pages of your magazine to get a message which would affect children adversely, that is, to have an effect upon their doing deeds of violence or sadism, whatever is depicted?
Because no message is being given to them. In other words, when we write a story with a message, it is deliberately written in such a way that the message, as I say, is spelled out carefully in the captions. The preaching, if you want to call it, is spelled out carefully in the captions, plus the fact that our readers by this time know that in each issue of Shock Suspense Stories, the second of the stories will be this type of story.
Mr. Beezer says, a message can be gotten across without spelling out in that detail. For example, take this case that was presented this morning of the child who was in a foster home who became a werewolf and foster parents.
That was one of our stories.
A child who killed her mother. Do you think that would have any effect at all on a child who is in a foster placement, who is with foster parents, who has fears? Do you not think that child in reading the story would have some of the normal fears which a child has, some of the normal desires tightened, increased?
I honestly can say I don't think so. No message has been spelled out there. We were not trying to prove anything with that story. None of the captions said anything like, if you are unhappy with your stepmother, shoot her.
No, but here you have a child who is in a foster home, who has been treated very well, who has fears and doubts about the foster parent. This child would normally identify herself in this case with a child in a similar situation, and there a child in a similar situation turns out to have foster parents who become werewolves. Do you not think that this would increase a child's anxiety?
Most foster children, I am sure, are not in homes such as were described in those stories. Those were pretty miserable homes.
You mean the houses that had vampires in them? Those were not nice homes?
Yes.
Do you know any place where there is any such thing?
As vampires?
Yes.
No, sir, this is fantasy. The point I am trying to make is that I am sure no foster children are kept locked up in their room for months on end, except in those rare cases that you hear about where there is something wrong with the parents, such as the foster child in one of these stories was. And on the other hand, I am sure that no foster child finds himself with a drunken father and a mother who is having an affair with someone else.
Yet you do hear of the fact that an awful lot of delinquency comes from homes that are broken. You hear of drunkenness in the same homes. Do you think these children who read those comics identify themselves with the poor home situation, with maybe the drunken father or mother who is going out, and identify themselves and see themselves portrayed there?
It has been my experience in writing these stories for the last 6 or 7 years that whenever we have tested them out on kids or teenagers or adults, no one ever associates himself with someone who is going to be put upon. They always associate themselves with the one who is doing the putting upon.
You do test them out on children, do you?
Yes.
Is that one of your stories, the picture of the two in the electric chair, the little girl down in the corner? This is from a story called The Orphan from Shock Suspense Stories 14.
Yes.
As we understood from what we heard of that story, the little girl is not being put upon there, is she? She is triumphant, apparently, that insofar as we heard the relation of the story this morning.
If I may explain, the reader does not know that until the last panel, which is one of the things we try to do in our stories, is have an O. Henry ending for each story.
I understand you used the phrase put upon, and that was no reader identification with one was put upon, but the converse.
That is right, sir.
Now, in that one, what would your judgment or conclusion as to the identification of the reader with that little girl who has, to use the phrase, framed her mother and shot her father?
In that story, if you read it from the beginning, because you can't pull things out of context,
That is right. You cannot do that.
you will see that a child leads a miserable life in the 6 or 7 pages. It is only on the last page she emerges triumphant.
As a result of murder and perjury, she emerges as triumphant.
That is right.
Is that the O. Henry finish?
Yes.
In other words, everybody reading that would think this girl would go to jail. So the O. Henry finish changes that, makes her a wonderful looking girl.
No one knows she did it until the last panel.
Do you think it does them a lot of good to read these things?
I don't think it does them a bit of good, but I don't think it does them a bit of harm either.
What would be your procedure to test the story out on a child or children?
I give them a story to read and I ask them if they enjoyed it and if they guessed the ending. If they said they enjoyed it and didn't guess the ending, I figure it is a good story, entertaining.
What children do you use to make these tests with?
Friends and relatives.
Do you have any children of your own, Mr. Gaines?
No, sir.
Do you use any of the children of your own family, any nieces, nephews?
My family has no children, but if they had, I would use them.
Do you test them out on children of your friends, do you?
Yes.
Mr. Gaines, in your using tests, I don't think you are using it in the same way as we are here. You are not trying to test the effect on the child, you are trying to test the readability and whether it will sell.
Certainly.
That is a different kind of test than the possible effect on the child. Then you have not conducted any tests as to the effects of these upon children.
No, sir.
Were you here this morning when Dr. Peck testified?
I was.
Do you listen to his testimony as to the possible effect of these comics upon an emotionally maladjusted child?
I heard it.
Do you disagree with it?
I disagree with it. Frankly, I could have brought many, many quotes from psychiatrists and child welfare experts and so forth pleading the cause of Comic Magazine. I did not do so because I figured this would all be covered thoroughly before I got here, and it would just end up in a big melee of pitting experts against experts.
Let me get the limits as far as what you put into your magazine. Is the sole test of what you would put into your magazine whether it sells? Is there any limit you can think of that you would not put in a magazine you thought a child should not see or read about?
No, I wouldn't say that there is any limit for the reason you outlined. My only limits are bounds of good taste, what I consider good taste.
This is where we're getting dicey, Jimmy. Then you think a child cannot in any way, shape, or manner be hurt by anything that a child reads or sees?
I don't believe so.
There would be no limit, actually, to what you put in your magazines?
Only within the bounds of good taste.
Your own good taste and sellability.
Yes.
Senator Kayfabe is jumping in here. Boom, he's got the clicker. Here is your May 22nd issue. See covers above. And what the covers are, it's Crime Suspense Stories 23, where a dude is choking a chick out in a canoe. And Crime Suspense Stories 22, which is the infamous severed head axe with the blood and guts. Maybe you could pop these up on the screen, Jimmy, and let the people freshen up their point of view. Here is your May 22 magazine. This seems to be a man with a bloody axe holding a woman's head up, which has been severed from her body. Do you think that is in good taste?
Yes, sir. I do for the cover of a horror comic. A cover in bad taste, for example, might be defined as holding the head a little higher so that the neck could be seen dripping blood from it, and moving the body over a little further so the neck of the body could be seen to be bloody.
You have blood coming out of her mouth.
A little.
Here is blood on the axe. I think most adults are shocked by that. And then the chairman says, here's another I want to show. Then back to Senator Kayfabe. This is the July one. It seems to be a man with a woman in a boat, and he is choking her to death with a crowbar. Is that in good taste?
I think so.
How could it be worse? Senator Hennings pops in. Mr. Chairman, if counsel will bear with me. I don't think that it is really the function of our committee to argue with this gentleman. I believe he has given us. Is that my phone or yours?
It's yours.
I have the thing on airplane mode. Mr. Chairman, if council will bear with me, I don't think it is really the function of our committee to argue with this gentleman. I believe that he has given us about the sum and substance of his philosophy, but I would like to ask one question, sir. The chairman says, you may proceed. Senator Henning says, you have indicated by what, I hope you will forgive me if I suggest, seems to be a bit of self-righteousness, that your motivation was bringing enjoyment. Is that the word you used?
Yes, sir.
To the reader of these publications, you do not mean to disassociate the profit motive entirely, do you?
Certainly not.
Without asking you to delineate as between the two, we might say there's a combination of both, is there not?
No question about it.
Is there anything else you would like to say with us with respect to your business and the matters that we are inquiring to hear?
I don't believe so.
Senator Kayfabe pops in. I would like to ask one or two questions. The chairman says, you may proceed, Senator. And then Kayfabe says, Mr. Gaines, I have heard that your father really did not have horror and crime comics. When he had the business, he printed things that were really funny and stories from the Bible. But you are the one that started out this crime and horror business.
I did not start crime. I started horror.
Who started crime?
I really don't know.
Anyway, you are the one who, after you took over your father's business in 1947, you started this sort of thing here. This is the May edition of horror.
I started what we call our New Trend magazines in 1950.
How many of these things do you sell a month, Mr. Gaines?
It varies. We have an advertising guarantee of 1.5 million a month for our entire group.
This is for all entertaining comics, of which Shock is one of them. How do you distribute these, Mr. Gaines?
I have a national distributor. These are roughly 10 individual national distributors which handle roughly half of the magazines. The other half is handled by American News. The one of the 10 that I have is Leader News Company.
This is a distributor. Then do they sell to wholesalers?
They in turn sell to 700 odd wholesalers around the country.
The wholesalers then pass it out to the retailers, the drugstores and newsstands. Is that right?
That is right.
They are sold on a consignment basis? Question.
They are all returnable.
So your magazines, along with what others the wholesaler may be handling, are taken in a package to the retailer and left there, and he is supposed to put them on the stand and sell them.
Yes.
And if he does not sell them or does not display them, then he is liable to get another retailer?
No, we cover every retailer as far as I know.
You don't like things to be put back and resold. You would like them to be sold.
I would prefer it. Comics are so crowded today, I think there are some 500 titles. That it is impossible for any retailer to give all 500 different places.
I notice in this edition of May 14th, the one in which you have the greasy Mexican, the first page has apparently two shootings going on at the same time here. Then on the next page is an advertisement for young people to send $1 and get the Panic for the next 8 issues. Is that not right?
That is right.
This says the editors of Panic, 222 Lafayette Street. Is that you?
That is right.
Then the attraction here is, I dreamed, quote, I dreamed when I went to a fraternity smoker in my Panic magazine, unquote. You have dice on the floor and cigarettes, somebody getting beer out, somebody laying on his back taking in a drink. Do you think that is all right?
This is an advertisement for one of my Lampoon magazines. This is a lampoon of the Maidenform Brassiere ad. I dreamed I went to so-and-so in my Maidenform Brassiere, which has appeared in the last 6 years in national family magazines showing girls leaping through the air in brassieres and panties. We simply lampoon by saying, I dreamed I went to a fraternity smoker in my Panic magazine.
I mean, do you like to portray a fraternity smoker like that?
This is a lampoon magazine. We make fun of things.
You think that is in good taste?
Yes, sir.
I've looked through these stories. Every one of them seems to end with murder practically. I've looked through this one where you have the greasy Mexican and the Puerto Rican business. I can't find any moral or better race relations in it, but I think that ought to be filed so that we can study it and see and take into consideration what Mr. Gaines has said. The chairman says, Mr. Gaines, have you no objection to having this made part of the permanent files, have you?
No, sir.
Then, without objection, it will be so ordered. Let it be Exhibit Number 12. And then the magazines are referred to as such. Senator Kefauver, is Mr. Gaines a member of the association that we talked about here this morning, which would be the Association of Comic Magazine Publishers?
No longer. I was a member for about 2 or 3 years, and I resigned about 2 or 3 years ago.
How did you happen to resign, Mr. Gaines?
Principally for financial reasons.
It only has $15,000 a year for a whole operation.
At that time, my share would have been $2,000. At that time also, about 10% of the publishers were represented. I was a charter member of the association. I stuck with it for 2 or 3 years. The theory was that we were going to get all the publishers into it, and then the burden of financial...
Did you have any argument about censorship about this gentleman, Mr. Schultz, who has here, not liking the kind of things you publish?
No, sir. Mr. Schultz and I frequently had disagreements, which we would iron out, and I would make the changes he required until I decided to resign.
Did you have any part, Mr. Gaines, in preparing that code?
No, the code was prepared by, I believe, the first board of directors of the association. I was on the board of directors later on, but not at first.
Did you subscribe to the code?
Yes, sir.
Did you think that publishing a magazine like this, for example, would still be within the code?
No, sir.
You admit none of this would have come within that code?
Certain portions of the code I have retained. Certain portions of the code I have not retained. I don't agree with the code in all points.
The code that you have here, none of your stories would come in that code. You could not print any of these if you compiled with the full code we read this morning.
I would have to study the story and study the code to answer that.
How much is your monthly income from all your corporations with this thing, Mr. Gaines?
You mean by that my salary?
No. How much do you take in a month from your publications?
I wouldn't know monthly. We figure it annually.
Let's say gross.
I don't know.
What is your best estimate annually?
I would say about $80,000 a month gross.
How many books did you say you printed a month?
1.5 million guaranteed sell. We print about 2.5 million.
How much net do you make a month out of it, that is, the corporations?
Last year, it came out to about $4,000 a month.
Do you have several corporations, Mr. Gaines?
Yes, sir.
How many corporations do you have?
I have 5.
Why do you have 5 corporations?
Well, I don't really know. I inherited stock in 5 corporations which were formed by my father before his death. In those days, he started a corporation, I believe, for every magazine. I have not adhered to that. I have just kept the original 5 and published about 2 magazines in each corporation.
Do you not think the trouble might have been in one magazine got in trouble that... Hold up. I'm sorry. Do you not think the trouble might have been if one magazine got in trouble, that corporation would not adversely affect the others?
Oh, hardly.
Do you get one magazine banned by the Attorney General? Did you not?
The Attorney General of Massachusetts reneged and claims he has not banned it. I still don't know what the story was.
Anyway, he said he was going to prosecute you if you sent that magazine over there anymore.
He thereafter, I understand, said he never said he would prosecute.
That is the word you got, though, that he was going to prosecute you.
Yes.
When was that?
Just before Christmas.
Which magazine was that?
That was for Panic #1.
Just one other question. There is some association that goes over these things. Do you make any contribution to the membership of any associations?
No.
Any committee that supervises the industry?
No. There is no such committee or organization aside from the Association of Comic Magazine Publishers.
You said you had a guarantee sale of $1.5 million per month.
We guarantee the advertisers that much.
So that you have some interest in seeing that the distributor and wholesaler and retailer get your magazines out because you guarantee the advertisers $1.5 million sales a month.
I have a very definite interest. Unfortunately, I don't have a thing to do with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hannock gets up. Could I ask you 1 or 2 questions? The chairman says, Mr. Hannock. Mr. Hannock says, what is the organization that you maintain called the Fan Addict Club for 25 cents a member?
Simply a comic fan club.
You advertise the children should join the club.
Yes.
What do? Do they pay dues?
No.
What do they send 25 cents in for?
They get an arm patch, an antique bronze pin, a 7 by 11-inch certificate, and a pocket card, the cost of which to me is 26 cents without mailing.
After you get a list of all these kids and their families and addresses, what do you do with the list?
I get out what we call Fan Addict Club bulletins. The last bulletin was principally made up of names and addresses of members who had back issues they wanted to trade with other members.
Did anybody buy that list from you and use it?
No, sir, I have never sold it.
Do you know anything about this sheet called Are You a Red Dupe?
Yes, sir, I wrote it.
How has it been distributed?
It has not been distributed. It has not been distributed. It is going to be the inside front cover ad on 5 of my comic magazines, which are forthcoming. These include Crime Suspense Stories 25, Shock Suspense Stories 16, Tales from the Crypt 43, Haunt of Fear 26, and Vault of Horror 38.
And it is going to be an advertisement?
Not an advertisement, it is an editorial.
Do other magazines have copies of this to be used for the same purpose?
No, sir.
You haven't made this available to the magazines as yet?
No, sir, and I don't intend to.
You believe the things that you say in this ad that you wrote?
Yes, sir.
That anybody who is anxious to destroy comics are communists?
I don't believe it says that.
The group most anxious to destroy comics are the communists.
True, but not anybody, just the group most anxious.
Are there any other questions, says the chairman. Mr. Hennick says no. Mr. Beezer gets up. I have some questions. The chairman rings in Mr. Beezer. Mr. Beezer says, just to settle the point which came up before, Mr. Gaines, who is it that gets the idea for this, for one of your stories? You, your editor, the artist, the writer? Where does it come from?
Principally from my editors and myself.
Not from the artists?
No.
Mr. Beezer says, he just does what he's told.
He just follows the story and illustrates it.
He is told what to do and how to illustrate it.
No, our artists are superior artists. They don't have to be given detailed descriptions.
He has to be told what it is.
It is lettered in before he draws it.
He knows the story pretty much, so he knows what he can fit in.
Yes.
You said that you had a circulation of 5 million Bible storybooks.
Yes.
How many years is this?
12 years, since 1942.
In other words, in a little over 3.5 months, you sell more of your crime and horror stories than you sell the Bible stories.
Quite a bit more.
They seem to go better.
This is a 65-cent book. The crime and horror books are 10 cents. There is a difference.
No further questions, Chairman. The chairman says, thank you very much, Mr. Gaines.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Gaines thanks them. So that's that part of the conversation of the testimony and things. It answers some questions that I've had about the Comics Code, because if you look at the original covers of the EC books, there's this star shape thing, and it's kind of a censorship body. It's not called Comics Code Authority, it's something else, but there are two of those things that show up on most of those comic magazine covers, and I always wondered like what that was. So that clearly was part of the thing that he was associated with before then, which is pre-Comics Code Authority. But after this comes Comics Code Authority, and this is where, we read. I really hope that's not coming through. I have the airplane mode on, so like I don't know what to do about that. We have a video where we went through the actual Comics Code Authority in detail, point by point, what was included in that, and almost all of it had to do with Bill Gaines comics, with comics like Shock Suspense Stories, Weird Science, Weird Fantasy, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror. Couldn't have horror, couldn't have the word weird, shock, crime, like none of those words were allowed to be in the titles of these comics. Gaines had to pivot his brand very soon after this. Mad becomes a magazine, and he also creates like the furthest mags, like right behind, like these purple joints right here. These are the Pictofiction EC magazines, where they are magazine size, 8.5 by 11. They take sort of the best of the old EC stories and come up with like a text treatment that's typeset and things, and have like a solid spot illustration. So it's actually not far from the comics because of all the text that they use, but it's just handled in a more magazine-ish kind of way. But if it wasn't for Mad, having the success that it did, Gaines would not be in business.
Yeah, his business completely wrecked by the implementation of the comics code, which doesn't ban him from making comics, but it makes it very easy for a retailer to look and see no code and say, I'm not selling these. This is
Right.
how I get in trouble.
Totally. Yeah, it's a chilling effect that gets created. So the body of the books that are behind us here are that the new trend, as he calls it, in the deposition of court testimony. But you see these green ones right here. These are the new direction books that come out that have the comics code authority. Books like Piracy and Impact and the incredible science fiction, incredible science fantasy stories, like those have the comics code as well. And this is the comic he talks about in Comic Book Confidential, where one story completely was not allowed to be in the comic. And that story is published in the Big Russ Cockrams. It is a guy has an eyeball on his back. There's nothing more to it. It's just the ghastliness of that was like perverted to the censorship body. The story that they put in place was a Joe Orlando story called Judgment Day, where you have these two kind of like robots, or seemingly like robots or astronauts of some brand. They're coexisting. They're doing their thing. The astronaut at the end, the O. Henry ending to this one is that it's actually a black guy who gets to be an astronaut or something like that. And in the shadow of his face, you see like constellations. You see outer space. You see planets and some shining stars and stuff. And the comics code like did not want that in there. They said you got to take those beads of sweat, those stars and stuff out of the shadow. He said, "Fuck you. I'm not paying dues anymore either." They let it go through and everything, but he was done. That was the last comic books that he put out that had any kind of circulation. Now he's put on TV in front of everybody. He's got this dais of the powder wig guys looking down at him with their hammers and such. Other comic publishers and creatives are seeing this stuff, and this creates that chilling effect, which for years persisted. We're going to be looking at a comic scene magazine where Jim Dalton, who is the publisher of Marvel in '82, whenever that magazine comes out, he says in the text, these comics are for 11-year-olds. You have to think with the mindset of an 11-year-old. We've been criticized on this channel looking through those exact comics saying that these are for 8-year-olds, and people got very upset about that. Sorry, it's very clearly 11.
Yeah, right.
As agreed upon by Jim Galton, the publisher of, or actually I think he's the owner technically of whatever that was, because Stan Lee was considered publisher who agreed with that.
I think Dalton's the president.
President, there it is. And Jim Shooter, editor-in-chief, all in agreement. 11-year-olds. Your Daredevil comics from 1982, 11-year-olds. This is where Batman starts to get rainbow outfits, and he's no longer putting guns to the head of the Red Monk and killing werewolves that way. Because as creatives, and you worked with Marvel, I worked with Marvel on our grand design projects. I had to change one thing, and I got one sort of warning piece. One thing I had to change, I had to take a cigar out of the mouth of Nick Fury.
I had two Nick Fury cigars I had to remove.
Okay. And the other one was, I don't know what they were thinking I was going to do, but it was Professor X on the astral plane. And it's like the clothes don't come on the astral plane. And they were like, don't draw any dicks. I was going to draw dicks. It's a Marvel comic. I know that, So they were just like, make sure you don't draw dicks. The chilling effect was in effect with them. They wanted to make sure. But as a creative who's working on this stuff, you ain't getting the biggest page rates, so you don't have time to really be playing around. Taking out a stogie was easy. That took seconds out of my life, maybe 2 minutes of my workday. Involved censoring a cigar. You don't want to go into a dicey territory that you think might be great. It might be so good for your comic to then have an editor say, you know what, you got to redraw those pages, or we're going to have to run a reprint and you're not going to get paid. We're not going to sign off on this stuff. That could affect you. You can become homeless if enough of your work gets rejected at a certain point and the bills are due within 3 or 4 weeks. So it makes the creatives, it gives less incentive for them to be very, very creative and try things out because you got bills to pay.
Yeah, which kind of reminds me full circle back to Gilbert Hernandez saying he does comics for adults. And it doesn't mean that these are R-rated comics. It means that he's doing these for adults with adult sensibility.
Right. Yeah. I sort of think in that mindset as well. It's like, let's just remove that from a concern. I have so many other concerns, much bigger concerns in my life than to worry about those kinds of issues.
You mentioned that chilling effect. We had looked at the Stan Lee documentary, and Stan many times has told the story about being at parties, socializing, and trying to explain that he's a writer, when the topic comes up as to what he does, and just ducking the question of, saying that he writes comic books. Because in his words, whenever that part eventually comes out, that's the end of the conversation and the person leaves. I would say like some of the artists that I grew up loving, and I would say like John Buscema's generation, they would lie about their occupations because there was shame associated with comic books.
Right.
Even to the point of comic strip artists sort of implying like they'd like to give those lousy comic book artists what for, like talking down their nose at that occupation, which is absurd when you think of it as an art form as opposed to anything else.
Right.
But that's the effect. Like this thing had ripple effects, we'll probably have some pics in this video of comic book burnings. Just random people, parents or whatever, behind the church, burning the kids' comics.
Right.
And it's because of the way comics were branded based really on this televised hearing where it's like, these are the problem with juvenile delinquency and the corruption of our youth.
It persisted for a long time after that. I think that the Peanut strips that have the famous, like Charlie Brown at the thing, I don't think those are from the 50s. Like that comic gets started in about 58. So I don't think those are the early round, but that's a very famous kind of strip. And the comic strip artists were, they had the gravy train. Like if you had a successful comic strip, for a time, Charles Schulz was the richest celebrity of movies, sports, anything. He was the richest celebrity for a good number of years there in the 60s. Walt Kelly is the one famously who was like, if I see one of these cartoonists, I'll give them the what for. If I'm in a bar and a comic book guy comes in there, like he's going to get the business. Pogo was huge, and those negative conversations, those guys could see that it could have some lasting implications on their gravy trains and things like this. Now let's talk about some of the creatives involved specifically with EC. There were the famous Blab feature that Dan Clowes drew that was like the famous alcoholics of comics or something like that. Wally Wood is in there. Graham Ingalls is in there. And in the articles and stuff, it talks about how like those guys, like not Wally Wood as much, he stayed in the game, but Graham Ingalls completely denounced his comic book career. It was almost like Scarlet Letter, like he was involved in like pornography and completely fucked his head up. Wally Wood stayed in the game. I think it might be on even the Jack Davis, Harvey Kurtzman videotape that they did with Stan Lee, where he talked about just a kindly old Southern gentleman he is, Jack Davis, and feeling so embarrassed and humiliated by having maybe some of his images show up on the TV whenever they were talking about that stuff. It affected him, it hurt his feelings like really, really bad. They're having fun. They're sort of having like a rap battle with one another in terms of like the comics that they're turning into EC, like, oh, I'll do you. Oh, that's great. I'll do you. Not thinking about how this can affect them, at a greater level. And, these guys, it ruined some of these people's healths.
It also ruined the industry for artists and page rates. EC famously paid the highest page rates. So you basically close down that shop and you cut to these guys that maybe in the 60s or 70s go have a cup of coffee at Marvel for sometimes a tenth of the page rate. Like, like it destroyed an industry
Yeah.
from that standpoint, in terms of like the blue collar workers who comics notoriously time consumer and labor intensive, but you did have tons of writers and artists out there. And now this lowers sales and it lowers page rates. So you've really taken this thing that a talented artist might be able to do and make a good living at, and you've kind of removed that ability to make a good living for virtually everybody in the comic book freelance community. A legacy that continues to this day. You know, that's always been this bottom line thing. And just from a competitive industry, you could look at it and say, oh, a bunch of publishers get together and put this other company out of business. Regardless of the content, a bunch of publishers got together and put the guy who's paying the most out of business.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. There was an Overstreet book that was kind of like an encyclopedia of bibliographies of cartoonists, and it would have Johnny Craig in there, and you would see the bulk of his work is EC, but then it would be like Iron Man comics, and then you track those down, and they looked so uninspired. Jack Davis, you would find some of his Marvel comics. I got this cowboy story with like a genie in a bottle, you know, one of
I
those
have
horses.
one where somebody dresses up like an owl, and we're going to do that comic at some point.
But it's not his EC work.
No.
And certainly the Wallywood superhero comics, even the image in that Overstreet book is from Legion of Superheroes or like a Superman or something. And it's very uninspired material. Now, with every action, there is an equal greater reaction, right? So it's the underground comics generation as little kids who are seeing these things on TV. And now it's the adults. So you had these cool comic books because they're all EC guys. Like I talked about Blab. Like it's either the first or second issue of Blab. I think it's the first, where it's just testimony from cartoonists about their love of EC. I think that's issue 1 of Blab. Every great underground cartoonist is represented in there and has deep connection to EC Comics. So now their favorite comics, they're seeing on TV that they're getting dissed, and you know those housefrau moms were believing every single thing that came across the tube. So they're getting their ECs taken away, they're getting their ECs ripped up. The comics that are left are just trash, you know, like it's just pure pablum. So of course those kids are going to grow up, and when they can get their like hectographs and mimeographs and all that, they're going to make their own stuff. They're going to be inspired by those perverted comics of EC, and they're going to take it a step further. You know, they're going to take it a step further, and then just push every boundary and every taboo to the point that, you know, they're going to have to run off and go live in France. Some of them, 2 of them, the 2 biggest ones.
It is fascinating to think of this hearing having that type of an effect of bringing out the underground, you know, essentially inspiring the underground. And it is what happens. It happens everywhere. There's always that opposite pushback.
Right. And it happens to the pop culture media that is like the most popular of the day. I think it was at the beginning of our conversation here, where just mentioned that like we lived through 2 versions of this, with the music and with the video games, and stuff like the NWA record, without ever getting on MTV, has like "fuck the police" as like the main message. They got letters from the FBI asking them kindly to like please refrain from like including that song on future cuts and stuff like that. These were like extremely popular forms of music, and then the old Peckerwoods start to like listen, and that's where you get like Joe Lieberman and those guys like reciting the lyrics on TV. You know, from these like insane hyperbolic rap tunes. Video games start to become more than just like 2 little squares, you know, chomping like a tinier square. Start to get more visually interesting. The arcade boom with like Mortal Kombat was fucking huge, and then when like old people see that you're punching somebody's head off, there's nobody, like we were there, right? Like I never thought that I would punch your head off if I caught you right. I never took my mom's knives and tied ropes to them so that I could throw them and stick it in your chest and pull you closer to me. That never occurred to me. But I was that age that they were talking about, and I was seeing that, and that's the age that the Crumbs and those guys were when they're seeing that also. But these guys, like the Undergrounds, they weren't into like the superhero shit. It was before the second resurgence of superheroes, so superheroes were old fashioned. DC kept their stuff up as just kind of inertia because Superman was so huge and Batman was so huge that the diminishing returns are still pretty good, and we get some license opportunities and stuff. But they were looking at shit like Pogo, and they were looking at stuff like the Carl Barks comics and the John Stanleys and things like this. But there were the guys who were still fucking around with DC and Atlas, and they were on the cutting edge of Challenges of the Unknown and that era of Kirby and the resurgence of Marvel Comics. And those would be your Chaykins and your Alan Moores or your Neil Adams, your Frank Millers, those kids, they're peers of Crumb and Gilbert Shelton, but they liked the pulp more than the Pogo right. or whatever. So they're the dudes who are making the most noise because they saw these comics really hit a plateau of quality that persisted for years and years and years, that they were sort of pushing against a little bit, and then injecting little bits of stuff like the hairless, the cowled Batman that has no shirt with a hairy chest and nipples is something that Neil Adams had to fight for.
Right. And I grew up Miller was my guy, so I was reading everything I could. His entire maybe career, he has come out of this 1954 censorship idea. He would rail against that in letters pages of Sin City to the point of it was almost like I didn't get it. Right. Why are you this hardcore about it? Because it didn't seem like the pressure was on the way he seemed to be responding to it. But he wasn't responding to the pressure. There's definitely pushback in the 80s about comics becoming too violent. But I think it's really legacy of that 54 hearing, where it's we cannot let this happen again.
Right.
It happened once. Look at what happened. We had 30 years of these comics aimed at 11-year-olds. No.
Right.
And I mean, that was his message. Every time I'd read an interview with him or see any footage of him, that was probably the number one thing that was coming out of his mouth more than whatever he was promoting. There was always that anti-censorship thing. And I think it comes right back to this. This was the boogeyman. If you were looking at comics as an art form in America, this was the nightmare scenario.
Absolutely. And listen, we talked about it. Go check out our Dennis Kitchen shoot interview at the very beginning, the opening statement. When I was doing my Dennis Kitchen research, I come across a 1989, 1990 Larry King Live, where Dennis Kitchen is in studio with some ersatz wannabe Frederick Wortham kind of character. And this is post Dark Knight Returns, but this is around the time of Michael Keaton Batman, which comics are now popular again, very popular. When Arkham Asylum came out in '89, that's when the Batman movie came out and fucking made Grant Morrison extremely rich. So comics are huge again, and then you got these fucking douchebags coming out of the woodwork. Now here's the thing, Frederick Wortham in his day did a lot of good outside of comics, and he even became a promoter of fanzines and stuff. But the guy on the Dennis Kitchen piece is now in prison for over sedating and giving feeding drug addicted single mothers, and he created a sex harem. And this is not
right
slander libel. This dude is convicted and is doing jail time, and he's the dude on this thing that's I read Archie's and wholesome comics, and these comics are trash. Ain't that funny?
That's how it always goes, right?
Absolutely, man. So long-standing ramifications. We sort of don't know how good we have it to a certain extent. We have all of these venues for publication, but then things come out, and you have the idea of deplatforming and all of that sort of stuff is certainly a part of the conversation of these days. But we have every opportunity to publish our own stuff. If a publisher doesn't want to go on board, we can find our own niches to discover the audience or bring awareness to an audience for whatever works we feel like putting together. But I do think that it is great to have that reminder, that old cliche, if you don't know history, it's doomed to repeat itself.
We say it a lot on this channel where we'll look at things that are 30 years old and be like, we're still talking about this.
Right.
Like this conversation has not advanced. And reading that opening statement by Gaines, where he talks about like, you start censoring this, you got to censor this,
Right.
this. It feels like that part completely relevant. And to your point on deplatforming, distribution was the platform for a
Right.
comic book publisher. So Gaines could keep publishing without the comics code, but even the distributors would just be like, we're not carrying that because where's our money if the stores refuse to have it?
Right.
So like they're deplatformed essentially. Without that comics code authority stamp, distribution goes away.
Right.
The option to distribute. And it's like that's where people would publishers and creators would lose out. You know, we talked to Jim Stranko about self-publishing and why didn't Wally Wood work? Why didn't Gil Kane work? And it's because they could not do the distribution stuff. Because distribution has its own, I hate to say corruptions, but it does. You know, like every one of these systems has some of its own abuse. And that was what was deplatforming EC back then. It wasn't the comics code. It was what that comics code meant to the channels of business.
The biggest publisher of the day, they decided to forego participating in the code. This would be Dell, the publishers of the Walt Disney comics and the John Stanleys, the Little Lulus, the Dennis the Menace comics.
The beginning of Pogo.
Right. So they decided not to participate in that. They did their own distribution, and on their kind of spinner racks, like the Dell spinner racks and the Dell like magazine stand things, there was all this language about the wholesomeness of their brand and stuff. Like they put a lot of energy into selling their comics as the wholesome comics that parents didn't have to worry about whatsoever. And also, I think on like the back covers of almost all their comics was completely devoted to Dell comics or wholesome comics. So that was their reaction. They didn't participate in this thing where it's like you got to pay dues. They were the biggest publishers, so they could run that risk a little bit. You know, you could always participate next month or something like that. But they went through major troubles and probably hired some kind of or did some kind of Madison Avenue type Mad Men situation to do everything they could to create a campaign of wholesomeness for their comics. And within those parameters, probably the best comics of the day after EC come from Dell, from Carl Barks,
Yeah,
John
definitely.
Stanley, and a few others, because under the guise of those cartoony images, they could still do some stuff. You know, they could use that iconography. And I mean, Uncle Scrooge is a screed on capitalism that is couched with humor and hyperbole. Because sometimes if you get deep into the idea of capitalism, you have to laugh to keep from crying.
Yeah, there's definitely a reading version of that is critical of the American values that the Kayfabe hearings are supposed to be upholding.
Right.
Yeah, that's really funny. I have one final chilling effect, and that is on the readers themselves, because this is post-World War II that we're getting horror comics and crime comics and romance comics, huge selling genres that are being sold not just to kids, and I would argue even primarily not to kids. Kids don't care about a romance story, you know what I mean?
Right.
You're selling to maybe YA audience, but also adults are reading these things. It was very normal at that point. You get the chilling effect of like, now we have practically legislated that comics are for kids and maybe degenerate bad readers, kids. To be an adult reading a comic post this kind of television hearing, now you're an outcast. Now
Right.
you're just like inviting criticism and being labeled as stupid or whatever if you're caught reading a comic. So even if there were choices that weren't aimed at 11-year-olds, I don't want to be that guy.
Right.
I'm not going to be reading this on the train or buying this at the newsstand. And so like you destroy these genres, even if they would have passed the comics code thing, who's reading them now? There's a stigma against just being caught with them, especially as an older reader.
I hope you paid attention to the language of Gaines at the very, very beginning, where as he's extolling the virtues of the medium, what he's saying is that it's the training wheels of literacy, like where it's like we wean them off the pictures. You start them off with pictures and words, and then you graduate to prose. Like he essentially says that, and maybe it's his first paragraph, his first piece of the opening. So even the publisher, the way he's selling it to these guys is like, hey man, like we're getting them to read, like, but that was the function. I don't know about you, but going through that stuff, like when Gaines makes his points up front, sounds just fine. But when you see the way that these guys start to spin it on them. My hands were getting sweaty.
Yes, it sounds like lawyer speak.
Totally.
Yeah, it's frustrating. Glad to have it on the record.
And the one other piece that should be on the record, you said it up front, man. So you get all credits to this, man. You talk about the three big moments in comics history. It is laid out in the conversation. Like MC Gaines, Bill Gaines' father, is a part of all of that. The creation of the comic book with famous funnies. Max Gaines turns down Siegel and Schuster, who came to him with the Superman pitch. So if the second piece is Superman,
I was under the impression he was an editor for National and actually bought the Superman pitch. He was the guy who brought Superman to DC.
See, it's very complicated the way National works, because like if you watch Comic Confidential, Bill Gaines says what I said, but MC Gaines is considered to be like the guy, he bought Wonder Woman, and that's National. So I don't know how that shit works, but he didn't make the money that like Jack Leibowitz or those guys made. We'll put it that way. But he's involved with Superman.
Yes. It is amazing to think of the Gaines. Like, I don't know which one of those three you would kick out to say is a bigger comics moment in American comic books. That's my three top ones, and they're all Gaines.
Right.
Father and son, like, holy shit.
And leave it up to the kid to be a rebel rouser.
Yeah, right, yeah.
The Nepo baby comes in.
A little bit more notorious.
Good to go, Jimmy?
Yes.
Cool. So we got that one. That's at about 104. There's some stuff to cut, man. Like I hope you cut some of our reading or stutters and shit like that.
Yeah, I don't think it's too bad. I think there's we both have one where we restart.
Yeah, but I got some stutters in there. Make me look good, man.
Have to get some visual aids on there too.
I think so. Those covers,
because that's a good one to have.
Yeah, that could be a legacy piece.
Are we still streaming?
We are still streaming.
Hopefully, everybody, these are your instructions to the King Kayfabers: is make that video blow up, because like we'll bring out Dr. Wortham's testimony from that morning. And if we get some numbers on this video, definitely there is a potential follow-up there. And I do have the transcripts of Wortham's testimony, so that's something we can bring to you guys if this video does decent.
Yeah.
But it's good to have it on record, because like big time history. It's kind of amazing this doesn't already exist somewhere as it's going to exist here.
They mentioned the Tipper Gore stuff, and I definitely said that, but I hope I said it at the beginning of this video and not when we were off the record.
I think you said it at the end.
Specifically Tipper Gore.
Yeah.
I know I said it. Or maybe it was on the weekly that I said it. Fuck. I know I said it, but hopefully it's on the video.
Hopefully. That's the toughest part.
Yes.
I feel like sometimes I come over and it's like, can't talk.
Right.
Wait till we're recording.
Right. So I like doing those intros.
Mm-hmm.
Want to do some intros,
let's do
man?
that.
Here's another question to the King Kayfabers, and maybe we'll even say this in the Shadowhawk video. But when I was going through that, I'm like, okay, arson, like we did this.
We did it,
but like we don't have a video of it. My thinking is that whenever it's a Wizard mag, like you know how we did real.
That's what I thought too. That it might have been. We talked about it in conjunction with like when it was in Wizard.
Yeah, which feels crazy.
I tell you, I remember reading it. I feel like I remember going through it page by page.
Yeah, I don't know if we did some bullshit where it is so buried because the title is hyperbole. And you off the record, but to the King Kayfabers, what I was searching for was like luckiest image founder and like shit like that. That would be like extra hype to try to push it over. But I'm like, I cannot find the video is not up there singularly. I type in Shadowhawk, it's not there. So that's going to be a video that we're going to do, guys. And one of those reasons is for like on our travels, whenever like we can't be together and do a Sunday video. I put them up on the Patreon. I did a 1963 compilation. I did an Image X month, which would have been like the image number ones is what I wanted to do. I think that'll be a real solid video, but we don't got a fucking Shadowhawk. So if you guys know where a Shadowhawk is,
yeah, I looked curious. A little bit as well, and I didn't find anything. Like I looked Valentino.
Yeah.
I looked up like Backbreaker, spine, just anything, vigilante, like none of it came up. If we have a video of it and we can't figure it out,
That's a problem.
you know, one of the things that I plan to do while you're away is start go through videos
Do it.
and start making names that make sense, like the Hulk Hogan Incredible Hulk fight. You know, just whatever they are, try to make it a little bit more clear. And by that, it'll probably be like character and creator in the title. Even if it's still something like, you know, first 24-hour comic, the Herb Trimpe Iron Man, it'll still be like first 24-hour comic, and then it'll be like, you know, Herb Trimpe Iron Man 39 or something.
Yeah.
Because some of those videos are fantastic, and like, you know, those are older ones. Some of them we made whenever we had 4,000 subs.
Exactly.
You know, so people should see that. Like a lot of that stuff, I think is noteworthy.
Yeah, we gotta continuously mention the stuff that we have.
I was also thinking something we could do is whenever we talk about like 1,500 videos in our queue, that's the time to plug one of them that's related to what we're watching. Sense. You know, you know, like for Shadowhawk, it'd be like, we have all the #1 image books, you know, look up your favorite or whatever. But it's just as a way to be like, go find this because we got it.
Yeah. Here's a fun question. Something to ponder. In an Image issue 1 video, do you put Wet Works in there?
That's a great one. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What a sad comic. That's a dark side of comics book.
It is.
To me.
It is. It's the worst. It's the worst timing because like as a man, it shows so much about Wilson as a man in such a positive light because it's like he's stepping up for the family, but it's also at a like longer like cost. Like he stepped up at the moment like somebody was in great need and he was there for them. But like if he would have put that comic out then, like 5 generations of his family might not have to worry about keep paying the bills.
Yeah,
and like tough. So like talk about a Sophie's choice, you know. And I think that everybody would handle the need in the moment. It would be like a more psychotic person.
I wonder if he's talked about this, because like wonder what, you know, like the decision making is you're starting to see the image numbers.
Yeah.
And in your head you're like,
here's
maybe there's no choice.
Here's the thing. I like in that Wizard number 10 that has like the Youngblood cable cover, and they talk with the guys in there. I believe Wills is on the record on that one, and he doesn't see a ceiling. You know, like they're in the midst of that, and there are quotes where he talks about like it can only get better. Like so like he's not seeing a ceiling.
That's interesting
at all.
Because like I think about like issue 4 or whatever Simonsons are in,
exactly.
And they're like, this is a bubble.
Yes,
like this is not lasting.
Yeah,
and it kept getting bigger. You know, like from whenever Walt and Wheezy are looking around going,
their thing was false. Yeah, their thing was issue 4 or 5 because it was very noteworthy because before that everybody's talking bubble talk. And then the Image thing happens at like 10 and they're still talking bubble talk, and like very specifically Wilson's like, yeah, there's no ceiling on this. Like there's no end to this. This is fantastic.
Yeah, that is not a that is, you know, you think of these wrestlers that go down the road and they're like, save your money, kid. I feel like those Image dudes minus Valentino, 5-6 years would be the max, you know, that these guys are operating. Jim Lee breaks into Marvel in 86. Sells 8 million copies of X-Men 5 years later. Like they did not have that kind of like 20-year oversight of like, oh no, there's peaks and valleys.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Wow, that's like I say, man, that's dark side of the ring territory to me. That book, it's sad.
Yeah, it's not, and like I don't want to put anything on the wider conversation because it's like it's a real guy's private business and stuff. Like if it was like a Wally Wood kind of conversation where like generations removed and whatever, like it's easier to talk about, but like shit's raw, you know. Shit's raw. So this one will be, and I'll say the title at the beginning, like what we'll do since we were talking Shadowhawk, let's introduce Shadowhawk a little bit. Do we do the Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe part? Okay. Shadowhawk issue number 1. Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Shadowhawk number 1 is going under the microscope today, Jimmy. Jim Valentino's contribution to the Image universe. Ready to put it under the microscope?
Yes. I don't know if you need the ready to put under the microscope. Like you could just cut it on after the contribution to the image universe.
Yeah.
Play or tune.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if we should have some sort of like, just like a little, a little tease or something in there.
We should, but it kind of depends on the book.
Okay.
You know, some stuff I think it does make sense and some it does not. Here, I'll do one for comic scene.
Yeah.
Or does it matter what order? Do you want to do yours and then I'll
It doesn't
do mine?
matter. Well,
Does that make it easier to just dump
okay.
videos?
Well, that's still yours. That's still yours, man. Good to go.
Wait, which one are we doing?
You could do comic scene.
Okay. Comic scene number 1.
Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg. Today we're going to be looking at 1981's Comic Scene magazine, issue number 1, taking fandom and making comic books mainstream.
Nice. And then,
Bizarre Adventures 31, the violence issue.
yeah.
Hey, I'll do the welcome to.
Okay.
Bizarre Adventures number 31. Hello and welcome to your favorite YouTube channel, Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Jim Rugg.
I'm Ed Piskor.
Today we're looking at the violence issue of Bizarre Adventures, issue number 31, featuring Frank Miller, John Byrne, Bill Sienkiewicz, and more.
That was a wild comic.
It's weird.
It's a hard to read. It's all also ran shit. Like it's all a trifle to everybody involved, but the art is great.
Yeah,
That Larry Hama art, I would read
Yes.
1,000 pages of that comic.
that one's impressive.
Wait till you guys see it. G.I. Joe 155. G.I. Joe 155. Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Jimmy, today we are going to be taking a look at let me do this again. Molecular. I guess it's going to be in the title. G.I. Joe 155. Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Jimmy, today we are looking at G.I. Joe issue number 155. This was a chase comic for me. This is a holy grail, and a Kayfaber sent it in to us. That was a good comic, by the way. Did you read it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was one of the best G.I. Joe comics I read, man.
Does it qualify as, what's that word?
Oh, yeah, I guess it does, huh? Yeah, because it's like several letters and stuff. You know the other term, you ever hear picaresque or picaresque, Picaresque?
I've seen the term in print. What does it mean?
It's like a He-Man,
Okay.
like a the Destroyer or something like that, like a picaresque adventure story.
Yeah.
A Dragon Ball Z cover to cover. And with that conversation, I wanted to because like the covers are nothing really to write home about, but the conversation will be about the working schedule and that sort of stuff. Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. No, Dragon Ball Z cover to cover. Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Jimmy, today we are going through Dragon Ball Z cover to cover. And then Manhunter, Walt Simonson Artist Edition. Manhunter, Walt Simonson Artist Edition. Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Jimmy, today we got our hands on the Walt Simonson Manhunter Artist Edition. A while back, Tom and I went through the comic when you were on one of your travels. Got the hands on the artist edition, and people are going to flip when they see this going under the microscope. Is there anything else? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I think that was it, right?
Yeah, I think that's it.
And because we don't have to, just nothing built. That's all built into the KIF over thing. Okay, guys. So we're gonna break down. We needed the table for our little deposition reading thing, so it's gonna take us like 15 minutes to set up in the other room, but we'll start up a new stream. Go freshen your teas, or whatever, your coffees, and we'll see you guys in a little bit.